Welcome back, guys. Today's episode 8 True Camping Horror Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've been camping since I was old enough to carry a backpack. My dad used to take me out into the trails every summer, teaching me how to read the stars, how to listen for owls, and more importantly, how to respect the places you pitch your tent. Years later, I thought I was experienced enough to handle a solitary camping trip. Just me, my gear, and the kind of silence that either calms your soul or fills you with unease. That night near Raven's Gorge, I realized there are sounds in the woods that don't belong to any animal I know. That was the last time I ever camped alone. It was July, humid even deep in the woods. I'd set up camp around 7 in the evening. The gorge was off a poorly maintained trail in upstate New York, a place not many hikers visited anymore because of how quickly the trail grew wild again. Even as I finished building my small fire, I remember thinking, this is exactly what I wanted. No people, no cars, no cell service. Just me and the woods. I didn't know that wasn't true. After roasting marshmallows and reading by firelight for an hour, I crawled into my tent. The forest was alive with the usual night chorus, crickets chirping, distant hoots of an owl, a breeze rattling branches high overhead. It was ordinary enough to lull me toward sleep. Then, sometime just past midnight, I heard footsteps. At first, they were far away. Twigs snapped out in the trees. Then closer, leaves crunching under deliberate weight. Heavy enough for a person. I froze, trying to rationalize. Maybe a deer? But deer don't step one measured foot after the other like that. My skin prickled as the sound drew nearer until it circled my tent. Whoever it was, or whatever, it was making no effort to mask the sound. Then it stopped, right at my tent flap. A pause, and then came the sound I'll never forget. A long, wheezing exhale. Not the huff of an animal. This sounded closer to a man with a chest full of fluid, barely able to draw in air. My first thought was that someone else had wandered off the trail, maybe drunk, maybe lost, maybe dangerous. I gripped the flashlight next to me, heart hammering loud in my ears. As I shifted in the sleeping bag, something touched the tent wall. A brushing noise like long fingers dragging over nylon. Slowly, deliberately. The sound crept from one corner of the tent to the other, tracing it. I dared to turn the flashlight on. And when I aimed it at the tent wall, the beam cast a shadow. It was human-shaped. Mostly. The silhouette stood at average height, but its proportions weren't right. Its left arm jutted from the shoulder at a crooked angle, bent inward, unnaturally. Both arms hung too long. The shadow stayed in place utterly still until I thought maybe my imagination was toying with me. Then the zipper of the tent trembled, first like a light shake, then slight up, just a couple of inches lowered before I grabbed it from the inside and yanked upward hard. That was when the figure pressed against the fabric. The wall of the tent bowed inward inches from my face. I smelled it then, an acrid, rotten scent like soil mixed with old water. The shadow was clearer now, a misshapen head with something twitching along the lower half. A jaw? The figure made a rattling groan, low and drawn out, almost like trying to form words but not getting them right. Suddenly, the flames outside roared high. My fire, which was supposed to be dwindling to embers, snapped and flared as if gasoline had just been poured on it. The glow of the fire threw angry orange light through the tent, and when I blinked, everything pressing against the tent wall was gone. For at least 10 minutes, I sat completely still, not daring to unzip the tent. I listened for footsteps, for breathing, for anything. The woods had gone silent. Dead silent, not a cricket, not a bird. Just silence vacuuming the air. When I finally unzipped the flap and leapt out with the flashlight, the clearing was empty. My fire was still blazing high, unnaturally strong, like wood had just been stacked on it. Except I hadn't. The forest outside of the firelight felt darker than any night I'd ever camped through. I swung the flashlight beam, searching between trunks. The feeling of being watched was so heavy, it made my chest tighten. Still, I found nothing. I tried forcing myself back into the tent, but sleep was impossible. Every couple of minutes, I swore I heard something faint, what started as whispers, then a dragging noise. Duh. My nerves were frayed, my throat dry, and then it came again, the zipper, slow, painfully slow. I jolted up and slammed it shut before it could fall more than 2 inches. Whatever lingered outside gave a sound that was half chuckle, half cough. Huff. Then the weight fell against my tent again, harder this time, rocking the whole shelter. I screamed, thrashing, pressing outward with my boots until, abruptly, it stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. I burst outside, flashlight blinding against the trees. That's when I saw it, just barely on the tree line. A figure, thin, its limbs bent or broken looking. It wasn't running, but shuffling, dragging something behind it. It paused, turning toward me. My light caught the pale oval of its face, or what should have been a face. The lower half was too distended, like the jaw tried to unhinge but got stuck halfway. Patches of its skin seemed to peel like bark. It opened its mouth, or whatever that gaping hollow was, and that same wheezing exhale rattled into the night. Then it slipped backward into the dark, so quiet it vanished as though swallowed whole by the trees. I didn't wait for dawn. I packed in a frenzy, tossing gear into my bag with trembling hands. I hiked out on pure adrenaline, flashlight beam jerking over brush and branches. Let's see. Several times I stopped, certain footsteps echoed mine further back. But whenever I spun around, the trail was empty. By the time sun finally spilled through the forest canopy, I'd reached my car. Only then did my hands stop shaking enough to grip the steering wheel. Fin. A week later, curiosity drove me to check the spot again in daylight. My footprints, fire pit, and camp remained. But at the edge of the clearing, parallel to where my tent had been, there were grooves in the soil, 4 deep lines, sharp-edged. Too narrow for claws, too deep for fingernails. I've told myself over and over it must have been some trick of exhaustion. Maybe sleep paralysis in a tent, maybe a sick animal, but the zipper moving on its own. The fire blazing higher without wood, the silhouette pressing against me. No rational part of me can explain that. I never camp alone now. When people ask why, I give the easy answer. Oh, it's safer in groups. But the truth is, I'm terrified one night. I'll unzip my tent to find something waiting. Something that doesn't breathe right, doesn't walk right, but still finds its way to lonely campers. The woods are alive, sure, but some nights near places like Raven's Gorge, I swear they aren't alive in the way we understand. Sometimes they breathe back. I've always believed a man has few responsibilities more sacred than protecting his kid. That was why I planned the trip to Stillwater Lake. My 8-year-old son Ethan had been begging me to take him camping the way my father once took me. I figured it would be a rite of passage. Fathers and sons out in the woods, making s'mores, telling ghost stories, teaching him how to skip rocks on the lake's glassy surface. But I'll tell you this now, I will never take my boy camping again. In fact, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Because on that last night by the dark shore of Stillwater Lake, something out there decided to make us feel like prey. And it wanted Ethan more than me. It was late August, sticky and hot, even in the evenings. The campground we picked sat along the far bank of Stillwater, the kind of place where the water reflects the moon like a mirror. Families usually filled the area in the summer, but I wanted quiet time with my boy, so we went once school season started, after most folks had packed up their tents and headed home. The ranger at the park entrance, a wiry, gray-haired man, asked if we were sure we wanted to camp on the far side. Oh, he said, not many folks go out that way anymore. Strange noises keep people from bedding down. I laughed it off like an idiot. Just local superstition, right? A lonely lake in August is bound to fill up with weird animal calls in the middle of the night. Ah, the night. We hiked in late afternoon, pitched our tent by the water line, and grilled hot dogs over a small fire. Ethan laughed at every crackle in the brush, and I promised him nothing out there could hurt us. That night, I had no idea I'd eat those words. We turned in around 10. Stillwater lived up to its name. The surface was so calm it could have been a sheet of black stone. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of water lapping. That would have been normal, except there was no wind. When I sat up, the hair on my neck bristled. The water was rippling outward as if something had just waded in along the shore. I listened, holding my breath until I heard it, the faint sound of breathing. Not mine, not Ethan's. Low, strained, and slow. Ethan stirred and whispered, Dad? Someone's talking. My blood went cold. Because what I thought was breathing, I now heard as murmurs. Soft words rolling just above the sound of the water. Too quiet to make out, but undeniably human, or at least mimicking human speech. I told Ethan to stay still. I unzipped the tent just an inch and peered out. Moonlight turned the lake into silver glass, and there, standing knee-deep in the water, was a figure. A person, or so I wanted to believe. Its back was arched, its head tipped at an impossible angle toward the sky. Its arms hung not by its sides, but twisted backward like its joints bent wrong. The murmuring sound was leaking out of it in low whispers, the cadence all wrong, words jumbled and desperate. Ethan whimpered behind me, and instantly the figure went dead silent. Its head snapped forward and it faced our camp, though from this distance all I could see was a pale surface where its face should be. No features, just pallid and smooth in the moonlight. I zipped the tent closed with shaking fingers. I told Ethan everything was fine, that it was probably a fisherman, but I didn't believe it myself. Minutes crawled by. The murmuring started again, this time much closer. No sound of steps through water, no rustle on land. Just there, suddenly 10 feet from the tent. The words were clearer now, though disjointed like recordings cut together with spaces missing. My child, come closer. I clamped my hand over Ethan's mouth before he could cry. His tiny body trembled against me. Then came the worst sound of all. The zipper trembled. Not this time from wind, not from accident. The metal teeth actually moved, the slider slowly descending from the top, an inch at a time. I lunged forward and held it shut. The pressure on the other side increased, something testing the flap, no strength behind it at first, then more, until the entire tent bowed inward. Through the thin nylon, a handprint appeared. Long fingers, far longer than mine. Terrified beyond thought, I shouted. But it wasn't just a shout, it was a furious bellow, the kind a cornered animal makes. The pressure vanished instantly, but outside the tent, rapid footsteps circled us. Once, twice, 3 times. Like a predator toying with its kill. Every circuit grew faster, more erratic, until it stopped dead at the back panel of the tent. Silence. I dared not move, nor did Ethan. Then the voice croaked through the nylon, raspy, familiar. It was my own voice. Word for word imitating what I'd told Ethan earlier that night, a nothing out there can hurt us. But the pitch was wrong. Too much gurgle. Too stretched. Mocking. Ethan began sobbing, muffled by his blanket. I wrapped my arm around him, whispering to be quiet. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my chest like a drum. Finally, mercifully, the footsteps resumed again, receding into the woods. Neither of us slept another second. At the first sliver of dawn, we bolted. I packed camp in a rush, barely rolling the tent, practically dragging Ethan down the trail. Back. Both of us so spooked I couldn't tell if the snapping branches we heard were our own or somebody following us from just beyond the tree line. When we reached the ranger's station, I told him we'd cut the trip short. He gave me a look like he already knew. Then he said something that chills me to this day. You heard it, didn't you? Comes from the water. I demanded to know what he meant. He just shook his head, muttering, "It always comes back later. Doesn't matter what you hear, you don't talk back to it. Ever. And you don't bring kids to still water." That was all he'd say. Ethan doesn't ask to go camping anymore. At first, I tried to rekindle his love for it with day hikes near home, but he won't step into the woods after sunset. Not even now, years later. He says sometimes he hears whispers at night through his bedroom window. Words that make no sense, but every so often chillingly clear, he swears he hears my voice calling to him. Come closer. I keep my own door open now, always listening. And though I tell myself it was nothing human out there on the water, nothing man-made or explainable, I live with the gnawing fear that once something sets its sights on your child, maybe it never truly leaves. If you want the truth, camping with 6 college friends in the middle of the Rockies sounded like a dream, beer, laughter, hiking through trails none of us had ever touched. And that sense of fearless invincibility you have when you're 21 and think death only happens to old people or in movies. But that trip carved something into me I've never shaken. Because when you're in the mountains at night and you hear something moving, you feel 2 things at once. 1, there's no way it's a person, you're too far out. 2, if it is a person, that's somehow even worse. And in our case, it wasn't either. It was something else. Something that waited for us to turn against ourselves. We were 7 in total. Me, my girlfriend Rachel, my roommates Connor and Derek, plus 3 others we'd met in class. Typical group trip, badly organized, underpacked, carrying way too many bags of chips for the amount of real food we actually had. We hiked nearly 6 miles in off the marked trails until we reached a clearing that had a perfect view of the ridges cutting the sky open. The pines stood so tall around us they felt like cathedral columns, the wind whistling through the needles like a choir. After setting up tents and laughing around our fire, the night seemed perfect. Cold beers, ghost stories, even a few dumb dares. Connor bet he could sleep outside without the tent walls. Typical bravado. We never expected the darkness to bite back. It started with the sound of someone approaching our camp. The fire was low, maybe around midnight, when twigs snapped in the distance. At first, we thought it was a deer. Then came the crunch of deliberate footsteps. Perfectly human pacing. Connor called out, "Yo, who's out there?" His voice cracked toward the end, even if we all pretended to laugh. But nothing answered. Only more crunching, circling the edge of our camp. Slow, very slow, Rachel squeezed my arm. "Paul," she whispered, "we're 6 miles from anything." I shined my flashlight where I thought the noise came from. Empty woods, black pines swaying. When the light moved away, though, I swear, just for a split second, I caught a pale reflection, like eyes in the dark. No one slept easy after that. Come morning, we brushed it off as nerves, but things quickly got worse. Around breakfast, Ethan, one of the quieter guys, pointed out that Connor's boots weren't where he'd left them. We searched everywhere, by the tents, by the log pile, even in the brush. Nothing. Connor cursed and accused us of messing with him. Nobody admitted it. He ended up hiking barefoot around camp most of the day, his irritation simmering. Then Rachel found something in the dirt. Prints. Not boot prints, not paw prints. Barefoot. Long, thin, toes that dug deep like claws. They circled the trees around camp and cut toward the tents, stopping just a few feet from where we slept. Derek joked nervously it must have been Connor sleepwalking, but Connor denied it instantly, and anyone could see the trace of fear in his face. That night, we all agreed to stay up later, keep the fire high, and watch the perimeter. But once again, as soon as dusk melted into blackness, the forest noises dulled until all that was left was us. And then it came. Not footsteps this time. Whispers? Not loud, not even clear. Clear. Just vague, shifting murmurs weaving around the tents in circles too low to understand. I swear they were different voices. Sometimes a woman, sometimes a man, sometimes a child, all speaking at once in overlapping tones. Connor snapped. He grabbed a flashlight, stormed out into the woods, and screamed into the trees, "Who's playing games with us?" The forest went silent again, dead still, until a voice hissed back, his own voice, perfectly mimicked. "Who's playing games with us? Who's playing games with us? Who's playing games with us?" It echoed from 3 different directions at once. Connor lost it. He swore one of us was messing with a speaker or recording. Ethan started panicking, demanding we pack up and leave immediately. Derek tried to defuse things, but admitted he'd heard his own voice a moment later, repeating something he whispered to himself. By then, we were all on edge, snapping at each other, fear turning into suspicion. Rachel and I just held on to each other, terrified. We tried staying awake together around the fire, but that only made us easier prey for whatever game was being played out there. The forest began taking our voices. Every whisper we shared, every outburst, we started hearing it repeated minutes later, distorted and overlapped until none of us could tell if it was our friends talking or something else. By the 3rd night, none of us trusted any sound we heard. That night, everything broke. Ethan disappeared. We lit the fire high, and when I turned around from my tent, his sleeping bag was empty. His flashlight lay right there, beam still on, aimed into the trees. We shouted his name, but the voice that answered didn't sound like Ethan. It was his scream, but it was wrong. Stretched out, too long, thin, echoing like something using his vocal cords as an instrument. The whole group panicked. Connor insisted we charge into the woods. Derek shouted we should stay in camp until morning. Rachel clung to me, sobbing. We argued loud and desperate until the fire collapsed low, throwing sparks. For just a second, I saw them. Figures between the pines, 7 of them. Or rather, us. Every one of us duplicates. My face, Derek's, Rachel's, all watching from the dark, unmoving. Identical in every way except the eyes. In the flames' glow, their eyes glistened black, too wide, too intent. And even worse, Ethan was among them. Grinning at us from the tree line, Connor charged forward, swinging a branch like a club. The figures stepped back without noise, shifting just out of the firelight. Ethan vanished into the trees with them. We never saw him again. We fled at first light, exhausted, paranoid, barely packing our gear. None of us spoke the entire hike back down. By the time we reached the ranger station, we were half convinced none of us were real anymore. The ranger radioed a search team, but they never found Ethan. The official report said he likely got lost overnight and succumbed to the cold. His parents believed it. Maybe they had to. But every one of us who was there knows the truth. He didn't just wander off. Something took him. Something that wears a voice like a mask, that laws friends into the trees, that feeds off mistrust and fear until you can't even believe the sound of your own words. It's been years since that trip. We rarely talk about it. Derek moved away. Connor drinks too much and doesn't camp. Rachel won't go into the woods at all. As for me, I don't speak when I walk through quiet places alone, because sometimes in silence I hear that terrible overlapping chorus again, the one that repeats you back to yourself until you lose track of who you are. And somewhere high in the Rockies under the endless pines, there's still a boy's voice echoing, a boy named Ethan, who's playing games with us. Only now, I think, the answer is clear. I've been backpacking solo for years. I know it's not as safe. Everyone tells me a woman wandering off into wilderness alone is practically asking for trouble, but I've never been one for group trips. The quiet I find on the trail gives me strength. Being alone makes me feel like I can actually hear my thoughts. At least it used to. After what happened in Olympic National Forest 2 years ago, I can't even walk down a moss-covered trail without breaking into a cold sweat. I discovered something out there that still crawls through my dreams, a campsite left behind, a fire that wouldn't die, and the sensation that I wasn't discovering anything at all. I was being led there, and once you've been led somewhere, you have to wonder, what exactly wanted you there? It was late September. Autumn had settled in, the mornings crisp and gray with fog, the afternoons dim and short-lived. I'd been hiking solo for 3 days through the dense, wet heart of the Pacific Northwest, a labyrinth of ferns, thick cedar trunks, and moss clinging to everything like the forest was slowly swallowing it whole. I'd planned to loop around Lake Crescent, then head deeper on some lesser-known side trails before returning to base. I'd passed maybe one other person the entire trip, a fisherman on day 1. Beyond that, just solitude. By day 3, I hadn't seen anyone in 24 hours. And yet, as I hiked through a particularly narrow stretch of forest that afternoon, I smelled something faint. Smoke. Not the musty, crackling wood smoke of a distant campfire long burned out either. This was fresh, sharp, lingering. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. Not on that section of trail. Curiosity got the better of me. I veered off course, following the smell through brush until I noticed flickering orange ahead in the fog. There it was, a campsite. But what made my skin crawl instantly was how wrong it looked. The tent was half collapsed, its poles bent unnaturally inward. A blue backpack lay flung open, belongings strewn about the mud as if someone dropped everything mid-motion. A metal mug sat at the base of a stump, still half full with something steaming. And the fire, God, the fire. It blazed higher than mine ever managed, fueled by 3 logs blackened with intense burn, except the wood wasn't really disintegrating. The flame ate, shimmered, roared, but the logs were intact, as if the fire couldn't consume them. That was impossible. Olive, I called, raising my voice despite the knot in my chest. Is anybody here? Silence. No movement in the tent. No rustle in the brush. Nothing but the fire crackling unnaturally. I should have turned right then. But breaking the solitude of days is disorienting. You feel compelled to find the human source, so I stepped closer. Up close, the details grew worse. The mug was still warm to the touch. Coffee inside, rich and fresh. Someone had been drinking it within the last hour, maybe less, but no footprints surrounded the camp. The ground was soft and damp mud, pine needles, mossy patches. Any person who stepped in and out would have left traces. Nothing. Just the faint impressions around the tent, older than a day. I knelt by the backpack. A phone charger stuck out from its pocket. Notebook. Toothbrush. A pair of socks. Everything was in disarray, dumped out almost violently, but no phone, no wallet, no identification, just anonymous pieces of a vanished person's life. Then I crouched near the flame, mesmerized by how it burned. The logs gleamed with slick patterns, as if resin bled up from inside them over and over again, feeding fire without loss. I swear, staring into it too long gave me vertigo. The flames didn't just flicker, they seemed to pulse, like the fire were breathing. That's when I noticed the sound. Not a pop or snap from the logs, not the expected wood crackle, but a low, steady whisper threading between the flames. At first I thought it was the wind. Then the words formed. Come sit, come sit, come sit. I stumbled back, pulse skyrocketing, scanning for someone hiding. But nothing moved. My voice cracked when I shouted, "This isn't funny. If you're here, show yourself." No answer, except the fire hissing louder. The whispering seemed both in my ears and deep in my skull. I forced myself to turn, ready to bolt, when the tent flap side opened. But no one stepped out. It opened only halfway, fluttering faintly in still dead air. Inside, the shadows were heavy, but I swore something crouched low in the corner. A heap of blackness, vaguely human in shape, unmoving. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and shouted again, "Hello? Do you need help?" No answer. Just the fire, roaring higher, the logs untouched. Then, from inside the tent, a sound bubbled up. A moan. Wet, like air forced through fluid. It dragged too long to be human, rising and dropping in a grotesque rhythm. I stopped breathing. The corner shape shifted, slowly. I didn't wait any longer. I bolted. I ran at full tilt back through the brush toward my trail. My own campsite was half a mile away, but as I pushed through undergrowth, the woods didn't feel right anymore. The trees looked the same, over and over. Each clearing, each mossy snag, a mirror of the one before. At some point I realized I had circled, because up ahead through the fog, I saw the fire again. No, not again. The same one. It greeted me like I had never left. The flames licked impossibly high now, ash spiraling but never falling. The tent flap hung open wide, and the shadow inside crawled closer toward the entrance. Come sit, come sit. The whisper burrowed into my head, louder, now clear. Stay, sit, burn with us. I broke. I screamed into the trees, running blindly. Scratches tore my legs, branches whipped my face. The forest wheeled endlessly, but finally the fire grew distant behind me. At last came silence again. I didn't stop until I reached my own tent, gasping in the thinning gray of dawn. I didn't sleep. I stuffed everything into my pack with trembling hands and hiked all the way back down to the trailhead in one push. When I reached the ranger station, I reported what I'd seen. The ranger listened quietly, eyes never leaving mine. When I described the fire that wouldn't die, something flickered in his face. Recognition, maybe a warning, but he only shook his head. "Oh, we'll send someone to check." Oh, that was it. I don't know if they ever did. I've searched the news and found nothing. No reports of missing persons, no strange discoveries. Just silence. But sometimes, late at night when autumn rolls in and my windows cracked for air, I swear I smell wood smoke. Sharp new like logs catching flame. And I dream of that whisper curling between flames. Come sit. I haven't camped alone since. Truth is, I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I had obeyed. If I had sat down by that impossible fire, if I had let the whisper in, would I have burned? Or would some other traveler stumble on my backpack, my mug of steaming coffee and a flame that never dies, wondering why there are no footprints leading in and none walking away? When people find out I used to be a scoutmaster, they usually picture all-American summer trips, badges earned, boys learning how to make knots and fry bacon over a fire. And sure, there were plenty of those. But you don't stay in the role for decades without carrying some scars. Things you don't tell the parents when they're smiling at drop-off, waving at their kids. One of those scars was planted in the Appalachian backwoods nearly 15 years ago. I still remember the damp air clinging like a second skin, the ridges folding endlessly into the horizon, and the gnawing realization that the forest wasn't empty, that we weren't alone. Because one of my boys disappeared, and then he came back. The problem is, what came back was not him. It was late spring, mid-May. I took Troop 317 into the mountains for a 4-day trek along a backwoods section of the Appalachian Trail near North Carolina, where rhododendron and mountain laurel grow so thick you feel swallowed by green tunnels. There were 10 boys with me, ages 12 to 16, plus my assistant scoutmaster, Carl, an old friend who helped me wrangle the chaos. We set up camp along a ridgeline after a grueling day's climb. The boys were in high spirits, laughing, cooking ramen, trading ghost stories. I made rounds to check tents, like always, emphasizing safety. You don't wander. Stay in pairs. Predictable stuff. But at 2 in the morning, I learned they hadn't listened. I awoke to hushed voices outside the tents. At first I thought it was raccoons making a ruckus in the mess line, but no. Two of the boys were whispering, frantic, "Mr. Graham, it's Alex. He's gone." I jerked upright. "What do you mean gone?" Turned out Alex, a mischievous 14-year-old, had gotten up to relieve himself an hour earlier. His tent mate watched him walk into the laurel thicket with his flashlight, except he never came back. We called his name. No answer. We scanned through camp. Nothing. Naturally, I thought maybe the boy wandered a bit further, got turned around. It happens sometimes. But the woods held a strange stillness when we went looking. No crickets, no owls, just silence. We shouted his name louder. Only silence answered back. I tried to stay calm for the other boys, even though I felt ice spreading through me. Carl and I split up to search, keeping visual contact with the lantern glow of the campsite. It didn't take long before we noticed something. Impressions in the mud. Bare footprints. Not boot prints. The boys all wore hiking boots. These were naked, elongated feet. Too narrow, too long, they trailed into the laurel thicket, winding deeper until they vanished into leaf litter. I called Alex's name again, but this time, something responded. It was his voice. From inside that tangle of brush came a faint tremulous, "Mr. Graham." I nearly pitched forward with relief. "Alex, don't move. We'll come to you." But Carl grabbed my arm hard. His face had drained pale. "Listen," the voice called again. Only this time, it was wrong. It was wrong. The pitch dragged lower at the end, stretched thin like cassette tape unwinding. "Mr. Graham." An echo followed from a different angle 10 yards away. The same words, the same voice. We froze. No boy could throw his voice like that, circling us from 2 directions. At dawn, Carl and I spread out again while the scouts huddled tight. We didn't make it 50 yards before I saw him. Alex, standing stock still among the laurels. His clothes were right, his build, but his arms hung wrong, too slack, his head tilted slightly as though straining against invisible strings. His face, when he looked at me, was flat, expressionless, his eyes glazed like clouded glass. I croaked. He smiled then, or tried to, his mouth stretched too wide, too stiff. And in his own voice he said, "Mr. Graham." Not a question, not a plea. Just a statement repeated over and over. "Mr. Graham, Mr. Graham, Mr. Graham." Each repeat was less human. Carl tugged me backward, hard. "That is not Alex." The thing tilted its head, then gave a sound that made my blood run ice cold. It spoke again, but this time in my own voice. Perfect imitation. Carl, help me. Carl, it's me." Hearing my best friend's name from my mouth, but not me, was like watching my soul muted and rearranged. The boys behind us screamed, and by the time I looked again, the figure was gone. Vanished. Just the endless green walls of laurel, nothing more. We reported Alex missing immediately. Rangers came. Search dogs, helicopters, the whole deal. They combed the area for 5 days straight. They never found his body, never found his pack, never found him at all. The official record says he vanished somewhere between 2-3 a.m., likely disoriented, wandered out of sight, succumbed to exposure. At least that's the story told to parents. But those of us there that night carry a different story, one that binds us in silence at every reunion. The scouts don't talk about it to outsiders, but I know they remember the voice circling in the night. I know Carl does. He quit scouting the year after, said he couldn't be responsible for kids if something else lived in those woods. As for me, 15 years later, I still dream of that flat, expressionless boy standing half hidden in the laurel. I still hear him repeating Mr. Graham with my own mouth. And God help me, sometimes in the early morning when the house is still, I hear an echo carried on the wind. "Hi, Josh. It's me. Let me in." When my husband and I got married, we weren't interested in tropical beaches or fancy cruises. We wanted something wilder, something to test us. So when we chose our honeymoon, we booked tickets to Anchorage, packed our outdoor gear, and decided to camp for a week beneath the swaths of Alaskan sky. People thought we were crazy. They weren't entirely wrong. Nothing prepares you for camping there, where darkness is never quite complete in the summer months, where twilight bleeds endlessly and the horizon never truly sleeps. At first it felt romantic, firelight glowing through a midnight sky that still looked like an evening stroll. But then you start to wonder as night lingers in this haunting halfway state. What else doesn't sleep either? Because something out there stalked us, patiently, each night closer. each night louder, and if I close my eyes, I can still hear that soft crunch of tundra underfoot circling our tent. It was July, prime high summer in Alaska, where a night is more of a suggestion than a reality. Luke and I chose Denali's backcountry for our honeymoon, far from the main campsites. We wanted solitude adventure. It felt like a private world, blue-gray lights suspended above wild fields dotted with fireweed, streams whispering under glaciers. The first 2 days were perfect. We cooked simple meals on a camp stove, froze at night despite double sleeping bags, and laughed about everything. We even joked about the eerie half-light at midnight, where the sun never dipped far enough to banish the glow, leaving the land between waking and dreaming. It stirred something primal in us, like we weren't supposed to be awake but couldn't help it. By the third night, though, we stopped laughing. That night we woke to sounds outside the tent. Fine, we thought. Moose or caribou, common enough. But when Luke unzipped the flap just a little, he said quietly, "There's nothing there." We listened. Crunch. Crunch, as if a person were pacing around the tent, deliberate even. I hissed. A bear? But we didn't hear snorts, no heavy huffing breath. Just the footsteps moving with human weight circling. Then it stopped near the head of our tent. We held our breath, and something pressed lightly against the nylon. A hand. I felt the curve of fingers through the thin fabric brushing right above my cheek. Luke jerked up, yanked his knife, and shouted. The pressure vanished. The footsteps retreated into silence. We didn't sleep again. Come morning, we laughed it off, though nervously. Lack of sleep does strange things. But when we stepped out and checked the ground, the soil told another story. Half moons, impressions, bare footprints, not boot prints, not animal. Human-sized, though longer, oddly narrow. The prints looped our tent over and over as if someone kept circling, inspecting. Luke wanted to break camp immediately, but I convinced him to wait. Where would we even go? Nobody for miles in either direction. It felt worse abandoning our shelter. We spent the day hiking deeper, trying to distract ourselves. But when twilight came again, an invisible weight pressed back into our chests, as though dusk itself had teeth. That night, the circling footsteps returned. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Steady, patient. This time something mimicked Luke's voice. Clear, familiar, just outside. A babe? Come out, it's me. My blood froze, because Luke was beside me in the bag, clutching me tight. The voice outside repeated, "Babe, I'm cold. Let me in." Luke roared, "Who the hell are you?" and brandished his knife toward the flap. The reply came, his voice again softer now. "Who the hell are you?" mocking, labeling him back at himself. We sat in paralyzed silence as the crunching circled faster. At points, I swore I saw shadows flick across the tent wall, though there was no sun direction to explain them. A figure loomed once at the flap, maybe 2 feet tall, then stretched impossibly like a lean column drifting away. Then silence. But even silent, neither of us slept. By the 5th night, we were unraveling, half crazed. We considered hiking nonstop to the ranger station despite the danger, despite exhaustion, but night fell before we could try. And that's when it finally entered the camp. We woke to the zipper parting slowly, not violently, not an animal tearing it apart, just deliberate. Tooth by tooth. Luke bolted upright and slammed it back down. At once, pressure shoved against the fabric. A hand or hands flattened across, pushing inward, stretching the thin nylon an inch from our faces. The outline showed tall. Too tall to be a normal man, its fingers split too long, curling downward. And its head, or what passed for one, pressed against the nylon, stretching it obscenely into our space. From the other side, in perfect chorus, it spoke. In my voice. "Luke, please, it's me. Let me in," he screamed at it, slashing the tent with his knife. The blade ripped through, opening a ragged gap. Nothing was there, just the endless blue dusk beyond, quiet meadowland, motionless. But the footprints were back, circling. Dozens of them now, layered over each other. We tore the tent down in 30 seconds flat and bolted through the night. We stumbled 6 straight miles back toward the ranger outpost, nearly collapsing. When we finally reached a gravel road patrolled by a supply jeep, we flagged it down like lunatics. The ranger listened closely as Luke described what happened. When Luke got to the part about voices mimicked through nylon, the ranger didn't laugh. He just shook his head and muttered, "Not the first time." He wouldn't elaborate. He just said flatly that sometimes the backcountry had echoes that weren't real and that we should move on. We flew home 3 days early. Luke tried to laugh it off after a trick of sleep deprivation, maybe group paranoia. I played along, but I know. Night after night, it circled us, pressing and imitating and waiting. It's been 7 years. We're still married. We sometimes joke darkly about how our honeymoon was the scariest bonding exercise imaginable. But Luke doesn't know I still wake some nights at 2 a.m., convinced something is pacing outside. I keep a knife on my nightstand. My ears strain for the crunch of soil outside my window. Because once, just once, I swear I heard my husband's voice outside the glass saying, "Babe, it's me. Let me in." The worst part, he was asleep right next to me. I've always been a city kid. The closest I came to a wilderness before my mid-20s was tailgating outside Dodger Stadium or drinking cheap beer on a rooftop with the hum of traffic filling the air. So when my friends pitched the idea of a weekend camping trip in the Mojave Desert, I thought it was a chance to unplug and do something outside my comfort zone. I figured the danger would be rattlesnakes or sunburn. But it wasn't the sun or the snakes or the sand that got under my skin. It was what we saw at night, lingering out in that flat wasteland where nothing should have been. Something was out there with us. It never ran, never even came close. It just stayed, watching, never blinking, always standing right where the horizon danced with heat haze. And the longer we stayed, the more it multiplied. There were 4 of us. Me, my roommate Dana, her boyfriend Marco, and our buddy Sam. None of us were outdoorsy, which meant, of course, we overpacked beer, forgot half the food, and had to YouTube how to stake a tent using 1 bar of cell signal. But the desert was jaw-dropping. We drove hours away from LA past the lights and noise until the roads thinned to cracks in the rock. Our campsite sat in a dry wash surrounded by low scrub brushes and sandstone ridges glowing in dusk light. At night, the stars came alive like someone had spilled diamonds over black velvet. Even my cynical heart had to admit, it was beautiful. We joked around the fire, told stories, tried to spook each other in good fun. I've heard enough creepy podcasts to know every of this really happened story starts with friends laughing by a campfire. We even said it out loud. We're literally starting a horror movie right now. Turns out it wasn't a joke, guy. It happened the first night, around 1 a.m. When laughter had faded into yawns, Sam stood to take a piss in the scrub when he froze, arm outstretched, pointing. "Do you guys see that?" All of us turned. At first, I thought I was just staring at some scrub bush, but no. The starlight outlined it too clearly. Something was standing there about 50 yards away, upright, human-shaped, too tall. It wasn't moving, just standing, arms slightly apart like it didn't know how to rest them naturally. "Probably just a Joshua tree," Marco muttered, though his voice shook. Dana whispered, "Oh, those don't grow here." We all stared. Seconds, minutes. It never shifted, never twitched. Then, nervously laughing, we all just sort of agreed to turn back toward the tent, pretending it was nothing. But I peeked back one last time. It had gotten closer. I didn't tell the others about that at first. I didn't want to be that guy. But the next morning, Dana said she felt like someone had been staring through the tent walls all night. Marco joked she was paranoid, but I could see it in her eyes. She hadn't slept. Daylight made us brave again. By lunch, we convinced ourselves it was just shadow play, desert silhouettes messing with our city eyes. But that night erased all doubt. Hours after sunset, the fire crackled low and the air temperature dropped sharply. That's when Sam said, "It's back," and there it was again. Shape at the edge of the wash, same exact stance, arms dangling just slightly wrong. The difference was, this time, it wasn't one. There were 2, perfectly still, both standing evenly apart on the horizon. We argued whether they were people. But who the hell would wander 50 miles into nowhere at 2 in the morning? With no flashlight, no gear, no movement. We turned our lantern toward them. The beam wasn't strong enough to reach, but for just a split second, it caught something reflective where eyes would be. My stomach twisted. They're just watching," Dana whispered. We tried to ignore it, going inside the tent. Easier said than done. I don't think any of us slept more than a half hour. The worst part wasn't seeing them out there, it was hearing them. Sometime past 3 a.m., faint clicking echoed through the silence, like stones tapped together in strange rhythmic patterns. It would start soft, then erupt in a sharp dissonant clack, then back to soft. Then faint crunches in the sand. Circling, I lay frozen, clutching my bag. At one point, I swore the sound came inches from the nylon wall. We whispered desperately to each other, praying morning would come. By dawn, the prints were everywhere. Dozens of long, narrow tracks etched around camp. They weren't boots. They looked barefoot, but with too many toes. Too deep in some places, as if they'd crouched near us studying. That third night broke us. As darkness fell, every one of us swore we'd leave first thing in the morning. But the moment the sun dipped, they returned. Not two this time. Four equidistant along the ridge, watching. We built the fire higher, hearts pounding. Sam screamed at them, voice cracking, "What do you want?" They didn't move, didn't flinch, but the desert wind shifted. And for the first time we heard a response, not words exactly, but voices, mimicking. Soft at first, then louder like a chorus of echoes straining to copy him. "What do you want? Want? Same cadence, distorted. I swear their bodies stretched taller each time flame lit their silhouettes, as if feeding on our fear. We panicked. Packed in the dark, tossing gear wildly into the car. As I crumpled the tent, I looked once more toward the ridge. They were gone. Relief flooded me, until Marco pointed out the one detail we hadn't noticed. They're not on the ridge anymore. We turned. They were in the wash. Half the distance closed, frozen in mid-stride, all in unison. We ran, we piled into the Jeep, kicking sand behind the tires as we tore out. Dana sobbed openly. Sam muttered prayers. Only after 20 miles did we stop, gasping, trembling from exhaustion. By daylight, it felt surreal, like we'd all hallucinated. But the tracks followed us halfway to the road. Long prints weaving, always in parallel lines, as if dozens had mirrored each other's steps. To this day, the four of us never really talk about it. When people ask, we say, "Oh, that camping trip sucked too hot." It's easier than saying, "We were watched by something. I live in the city again. Metal and noise comfort me now." But sometimes, late at night, when traffic dies down and the streets outside my apartment go silent, I feel that old desert dread creep back. That memory of perfect stillness, of figures frozen against a horizon that should have been empty. And sometimes, when headlights catch glass in the distance, I swear I see the gleam of two reflective eyes waiting for me to look their way. Because the Mojave is wide and unbroken. No cover, no walls. Once they know you've seen them, there's nowhere on earth you can hide. I worked as a ranger in the Adirondack Mountains for almost 20 years. In that time, I've seen wildfires threaten whole sections of forest. I've tracked bears into campgrounds. I've hauled lost hikers out of ravines that would have been their graves. You do a job like that, you think you've seen everything. But there's one night I can't shake. One report that came down the line that I should never have followed. I've left the service now, but I still live near the mountains. And at night, when wind howls through the pines, sometimes I swear I hear that same voice calling from afar. You don't really expect singing in the backcountry. But in 2012, it was exactly singing that nearly took my life. It was late October, crisp wind snapping against yellow leaves, clinging to the high branches. Most tourists had long vanished from the park by then, save a few late-season campers. Around 3 p.m., my dispatcher radioed me. A group of hunters had reported something strange about a mile off trail near Faro Lake. Said they'd heard someone singing faintly out in the trees. Not a shout for help, not a tune on a whistle. Full-blown singing, woman's voice, rolling melodies, though the hunter said the syllables weren't English, not even words they could place. Normally, I would have logged it and moved on. Hunters out there drink, they hear wind in the branches, they spook themselves. But protocol made it my job to check. If there was someone lost and trying to call out, dusk would make conditions dangerous fast. So I hiked out. I found the hunters within the hour, jittery men with rifles. One grabbed my jacket and whispered, "You'll hear her too. Don't follow the song." That's how it gets you. I rolled my eyes, but he wouldn't let go. "Don't follow it," he repeated. Then they bolted, breaking camp, rifles slung in a way that screamed of panic, not shame. Long shadows stretched across the moss as daylight thinned, and sure enough, after maybe another half mile, I heard it. A song, not loud, soft. Almost like it was drifting over water, but there was no lake that close. Female voice, lilting, hauntingly sad. The melody slipped, dipped, curved in strange minor keys I couldn't place. I stopped cold. The sound raised goosebumps on my arms, even beneath my jacket. I called, thinking, praying it was a lost camper. "This is the ranger service. Do you need help?" The song faltered, halted mid-note. Then resumed, clearer, closer this time. Against my better judgment, I pushed deeper in. As I trudged, I noticed something strange. The forest went wrong. The usual wildlife sounds. Squirrels, distant owls gone. Silent. My boots sank in moss too soft, as if absorbing not just weight but sound. The singing stopped again. I adjusted my flashlight, catching a structure out ahead through the trees. At first, it looked like any lean-to shelter we had scattered through the backcountry. But as I got closer, my stomach turned. It wasn't an official site. It was something else. A shack cobbled together, half-rotted logs stacked like crude walls, deer antlers nailed in jagged patterns across the opening. A stone fire pit sat cold and ashen. On the ground beside it, scattered bones. Human, I told myself deer, had to be deer. And from inside the shelter, the singing started again. Not faint anymore. Clear, rising in eerie, quavering tones. Definitely female. The voice wove higher and higher into a kind of climax, then dropped low and guttural, a sound that vibrated through my chest. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, but my boots kept moving forward. I drew closer to the structure, heart battering. My flashlight's beam cut through the dark interior. There was no one inside. The shack was empty. And yet the song grew deafening, right there in front of me. It didn't come from one point. It came from everywhere. From the rafters, from the packed earth floor, from the black mouths of the antler shadows swaying across the walls. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the melody pushed through, vibrating bone deep. The sense of being watched overwhelmed me. My light flickered, and in that flicker I swore I saw shapes pressed into the corners, curved outlines hunched, faces too long, mouths moving in unison though no sound came from them. The song thundered anyway. Come, come. Come, come. I stumbled backward, tripping. My light swung wildly and landed on something carved into the upright post by the door. Scratches, deep gouged letters over and over in ragged handwriting. Don't listen, don't look, don't sing. My throat dried out, because in that moment the song actually changed. It began to mirror me. My breathing turned into melody. Every gasp pitched higher. Then the song spoke. Words this time clear as human speech. It sang my name, not once, over and over. James, James, James. That snapped me. I bolted through the trees, breaking branches with every stride, the song trailing after me on the wind. But no matter how fast I ran, the voice never grew fainter. Always just at my ear, always knowing my name. I don't remember exactly how I got back to trail. Adrenaline blanked half the journey. By some miracle, I stumbled onto the main path just as my radio crackled alive with static. Ranger Graham respond. The dispatcher's voice nearly reduced me to tears. I croaked out my status, said I hadn't found anyone, and I was returning immediately. I didn't even mention the voice, not the shack. I didn't report any of it. Why? Because even saying it felt like repeating the song, letting it trail me back. I never went near Faro Lake again. 2 months later, I put in paperwork to be reassigned. A year later, I left service altogether. I can't prove what I heard. No evidence, no photos, just the terror lodged in my memory like a barb. But tell me why, on certain nights when the wind rushes down the ridges, I wake hearing a faint woman's voice drifting through the trees, crooning a melody that tilts off, key always ending in the same chilling refrain. James, James, James.
Nylon makes a particular sound when you graze it with your knuckles, like a small rain that only you can hear. It's the first thing I notice when I unpack my tent in the apartment, lay it across the living room carpet, and let it billow. The smell blooms up, wet ash that never quite leaves the fabric, the mineral bite of old lake water, and the stubborn ghost of DEET trapped in the seams. I'm doing this indoors because I told myself I would finally talk about the nights I've mostly pretended were ordinary. The truth is, I've put this off for years, and I'm still not sure if saying it out loud is smart or if it gives something shape it didn't have before. Camping made me feel capable when I was younger. It was simple math. Carry the food and shelter, mind the weather, read the map, come back a little lighter and a little proud. Somewhere along the way, I learned a different math, the kind where thin fabric and zippers and the circle of firelight might be the only boundaries you can draw, and you have to believe in them to make them real. I used to call that belief comfort. Now I think of it as a pact. The nylon promises nothing, but I promise not to look when looking would make the line blur. I don't have a hard list of rules written in a notebook, but I have habits I treat like law. I don't whistle after dark. I don't say my name beyond the tent once the fire dies. If something circles, I don't track it with my headlamp. I let the beam stay on my boots and let my ears do the work. I keep one light inside the tent even if there's a lantern outside, and I don't sleep with the zipper fully closed. I leave 3 teeth open so it doesn't remember how to stick. These details sound silly in daylight. They sounded sillier when I tried to explain them to friends. But most of them were born between 2 and 4 a.m. when the air is coldest and small sounds feel larger than your body. There are patterns I can't unsee now that I've recognized them. The steady, measured pacing that never cuts through the campsite, only around it. The precise arrangements left where no hands should have been. Lights that invisibly understand timing. Prints that exist only where the snow should not hold them. Water that moves as if it remembers a person even when no one swims. Everyone who sleeps outside a while collects oddities, the way a jacket picks up burrs. Stories about raccoons with criminal intent or wind that made the tarp a drum. This isn't that. This is the breath you feel on fabric when the night is breathless. This is the zipper that seems to learn, tooth by tooth, how to behave like a lip. I can't prove any of this. That's the other part of the pact. I don't have clear photos. I don't have an answer. What I have are 8 nights I've kept ranked in my head, not by fear exactly, but by how much they rearranged me. 2 bookends. The night I realized the tent and I had an agreement, and the night I understood that agreement had followed me home. I guess this is why I've finally unfolded the tent on my carpet. To make space, to remind my hands that nylon can still be just nylon, and to feel the familiar rasp before I hit play on an audio file I've been avoiding. I named the file by habit, tidy and forgettable, Basin Night 3 M4A. It's been waiting on my phone for months, blinking in that way things do when they want you to pretend you forgot on purpose. I take the phone off airplane mode, plug it into a speaker I don't use for music anymore, and sit on the floor. The tent fills most of the room like a gray-green lung. If all of this is going to leave my head, it needs a beginning. For me, the beginning is the sound, and the sound is the pact. The recording starts with the kind of noise your ears filter in a tent. A thin, steady hush that could be wind or breath, or the far-off conversation of pines moving against themselves. I hear my own sleeping, the soft hitch and settle, the muffled rustle of a bag with a broken baffle. The mic had been left on the little mesh pocket by the door. Accident or insurance, I can't say. The speaker fills my apartment with the old cold. It's strange how a room adopts what you give it. The air in here feels thinner just because my brain expects it to be. At 2 minutes, there's a change so small I only catch it because I've lived with the sound of zippers. It isn't the sliding we all know, the quick staccato run, or the careless zip that cuts your knuckle if you hold it wrong. It's 3 teeth lifting in a careful sequence, then setting back. A tick, tick, tick that stops before it can name itself. I pause the file instinctively and then start it again, the way you peel a bandage and stick it back down because your fingers aren't ready. When it comes again, it aligns with what I can only describe as a breath on the other side of fabric, a patient exhale that flattens some part of the nylon so the slider shifts of its own weight. Except sliders don't do that. Not like that. Not in time with lungs. The sound is ordinary if you don't know it. If you do, it makes your body remember its own positions. My feet curl like they're against the thin pad I use. My tongue goes dry the way it does at altitude. The tent in front of me holds the shape of the recording like a mirror. My apartment for a second disappears into cold and the small draft that gets under the fly when the wind can't be bothered. I hear a faint ping, a guy line humming in a register my speaker barely catches, and images start stacking, uninvited. The way a light moved once along a ridge with no road, a circle of stones I didn't build that rose to my waist overnight, a ring of lines in sand that refused to smooth under wind. My head stays with the zipper, though, counting teeth like a child counts steps, hoping numbers will domesticate what numbers never touch. 4.5 minutes. The slider tries again. It moves forward 2 teeth and back 1, like something on the other side is testing how far a ritual can be stretched without breaking it. I do not remember waking that night, not like this. That's what sits wrong. If I had sat up, I would remember the way the bag clung to my shoulders, the gentle panic of finding the headlamp switch in the dark with gloves on. The recording holds none of that, only the careful, repeated probing. There is no wind. There are other night sounds, a distant owl once, a dry grass flicker, my sleep turning over, but nothing that explains intent. I turn the volume down and then back up. I try my headphones. In one ear, closer to where my head was that night, the exhale feels nearer. The fabric makes its soft drumhead sound that taut paper note nylon gets when it's been cold long enough to forget what warmth is. Somewhere upstairs, a neighbor crosses a room. My ceiling ticks. The sound fits perfectly into the silence after. I wait for a voice. I'm embarrassed to admit that. Part of me expects one because names have a way of coming back to you in the woods, sometimes from behind, sometimes from nowhere. Nothing speaks in the recording, just breath and the certainty of fingers you can't prove. I watch the seconds crawl by and can't shake the thought that the tent isn't a house you carry so much as a ritual you draw in thin lines, and something learned how to press against them without stepping through. At 10 minutes, the zipper stops moving entirely. There's a long quiet, so still I can hear my own apartment's fridge compressor start and stop. I lean forward the way you do when you don't want to miss the end of something you can't see. When the noise comes, it's not what I braced for. A soft tap on a stake, the guy line giving a low, glassy note that resolves into nothing. In the tent, that sound means someone stumbled. On the recording, it means the circle was tested and left intact. I pause, swallow a mouthful of water that tastes like dust, and let the silence after the tap sit in the room like a guest I didn't invite. I stop the recording, and the apartment springs back to its real size, which feels smaller. My jaw aches. I'd been holding it shut without meaning to. The tent looks different, though of course it isn't. The fabric is dull in the afternoon light, a soft, forgiving thing compared to the stern, tight skin it becomes in frost. I'm not dizzy and I'm not shaking, but my hands feel imprecise, as if fine work, tying knots, threading a needle, would be impossible for a minute. It's always like that after. There's a lag where your body keeps obeying rules the room doesn't live by. It's tempting to solve it and move on. Thermodynamics, I tell myself. Cold makes things contract. The slack in a line finds its way to the lowest point, and a cheap slider rocked by nocturnal temperature swings can click like thought. Animals nose around. Condensation changes the drag on fabric. Audio compresses and warps. Microphones invent textures out of nothing. Maybe the phone picked up my own breath bouncing off the fly. Maybe I rolled over in my sleep and forgot. I stack the explanations until they wobble, and when they fall, I start again. I'm good at it. I've talked friends through noises in their houses and creaks in their cars. I can make almost anything into bad weather or a loose screw if you give me time. But there's a difference between noises the world makes and gestures. Every time I try to file that recording under weather, it wriggles out. Not because it's dramatic, there's nothing dramatic about it, but because it felt like testing. And if I'm honest, it echoes too cleanly with other nights. Footsteps that kept a respectful circle around the firelight as if the light itself were a fence. Stacked stones that adopted the tent like sentries while I slept. A ring in a meadow that sang when the wind stopped, leaving a tone in my molars. A voice in fog that knew my name from two directions at once. Coordinates on a radio that matched the hill I was on. Lines in sand that went around, and never broke for my boots. The zipper that breathed like someone learning your rhythm to see if you'd give it yours back. This is where the pact lives, in the decision not to help. Not to unzip when something politely fails to unzip for you. Not to answer when a thing learns your outline and tries to put a hand through it. You can call it superstition. You can call it survival. I call it courtesy because courtesy feels less frightened and more agreed upon. And I am sick of carrying these nights like a hole in my pocket where keys keep disappearing. That's why I unfolded the tent in here, why I hit play, why I am telling this instead of cutting the file into a million pieces and pretending it never happened. Telling it isn't breaking the pact. That's what I've decided. Breaking it would be standing up in the dark and matching breath for breath, or unzipping at the first tug and asking, "What?" as if you expect an answer shaped like a person. I kept my side most nights. Where I failed, and I did, was in the morning when the world is soft and you feel brave because coffee is hot and the sun makes ordinary shapes on your hands. Morning is when I investigated, photographed, tried to map the logic of what had happened as if documentation could erase the fact that it happened at all. I don't do that anymore. I used to make a show of cleaning prints, brushing away odd marks, kicking over any thing stacked. Now I leave it be, pack up and go. Maybe that's age, maybe that's respect, maybe it's knowing I won't be believed anyway, and understanding that disbelief is part of what kept me safe.